Hello and welcome to the Automation Insider. My name is Joe McGrath from Hy-Tek Intralogistics. We talk about a lot of automation topics every week, and this week is no exception. I have my good friend Mitch Hoogland from CASI. And Mitch, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, for having me. Excited to be here and work with the Hy-Tek team. My name is Mitch Hoogland. I work for Cornerstone Automation. Excited to dive in a little bit on inbound automation.
Cool. So CASI, Cornerstone, USA, all synonymous nomenclature there.
Yeah. The name. Whenever I say CASI, I'm like, do I work for CASI? Do I work for Cornerstone Automation? I use them both interchangeably just to make sure people get it.
Cool deal. Well, I brought you on today because there's this topic we end up messing with a whole bunch. And if we design an ASRS or a beautiful process for a building, right? And typically this happens when there's a high-speed ASRS. We have to kind of feed the beast. Like, how do you put enough product into a system? How do you decant product fast enough into a system to make it work out, on paper? Like, how do you do that? How do you decant real quick? And so I kind of wanted to jump in and start talking about maybe what a decant process is, what some of the things you need to think about are, and we'll kind of go from there. So yeah, like just at a super high level, Mitch, just what is decanting?
Yeah, in the decanting, opening boxes, getting product out is all kind of synonymous of people use it interchangeably. But in layman's terms, it's how do we get product from that truck into a system as quickly as we can and as efficiently as we can. So whether that's introducing automation or just throwing bodies at it, the auto decant is kind of all encompassing in that process, truck to automation system.
Okay, great. Yeah. And you hit on my next question, but there's different layers or levels of this thing. Like, you can manually drag it off the truck. You can get a knife and open up the box by hand, or maybe a safety box cutter, right? You can dump the stuff out into a tote and you can hand that to a machine. There's semi-automatic versions of that. There's fully automatic versions, which are actually quite enjoyable to watch them operate. In your experience, are people moving more towards this automating in decant? And if so, what's maybe the main driver there?
Yeah, it seems like organizations spend a lot of money, time investigating these high-end ASRS systems, AMR systems over the last couple of years. And you're starting to see that at shows as well as technology is starting to advance both upstream and downstream of those systems. So as companies have integrated these systems at their buildings, they look and say, well, we still have a lot of people both outbound and inbound, specifically in the inbound space, opening boxes, getting product out of trucks, doing that efficiently. It's a high turnover area. It's a brutal job. So how can companies automate that? So that's something that they're really starting to investigate.
Yeah, and I think if I were to summarize the big rub in this area is you have to open boxes. Sometimes it sounds kind of super simplified, but sometimes you have to open a lot of cases or boxes, and maybe you have to do it a certain way. It's a wild amount of boxes, depending on the type of industry. Like footwear, you could have, I don't know, cases of 6 shoes come in, and you sell 1 million shoes. That's it's a lot of it's a lot of boxes. So, and just so I make sure I hit this kind of topic, there's not just one way to open a box either, right?
Yeah, that's a good call out as well. So to the same company that sells shoes might also sell high-end jackets. So teaching your associates to be very careful, especially when they're opening those boxes, because you don't want to open product and start hitting the inside, whether that's your shoebox or it's the high-end vests and coats, and ruining products. So yeah, you're correct. Companies want to do that in different ways, and a lot of that depends on what their downstream process is. Whether they're putting that away onto racks for future picking, they're putting that onto flow, they're putting that into a pick-to-light area, or they're putting that in an ASRS system. And you're starting to see even the ASRS systems change as you can introduce not only just product into those totes, but you're seeing trays and other things starting to advance there as well.
Yeah, I've done a couple of systems where if I can auto tray, I can send a case directly onto a tray without any touching it. I want to do that. That's a huge labor savings on the decant process. But I have to cut the box open in a real specific way in order to make that makes sense. So, like I think the best example I've seen is if a real puffy jacket, right? I might only want like a picture frame cut on the top, so the most of the content kind of stays below the top surface of that case. Now, if it overflows the bin or the tray height, then you might like jam the robot. What are some other kind of like opening like methodologies you've seen folks use, and why have you seen them use those?
Yeah, I think the safety aspect is very important. So you mentioned the safety blades. We would say there's usually a performance decrease on those because associates have to cut 3 or 4 times to get the standard cut of a safety blade, but that is a expensive process as well when you're doing the same movement over and over. So that's where we say there's ways to automate that. Of course, we work for CASI, which has a system to do that. So we talk about that, but also the knives or tape cuts. There's just lots of different ways to open that box.
Yeah, very cool. And okay, so this question comes up a lot, and I'd love to hear your answer to it. But like, what if I don't want to open the box?
Yeah, good question. So especially as people are removing products off of trucks and they want to check that inventory and make sure that the second it hits that dock door, it's being inventoried into their WMS. So there's ways that as long as you're checking those barcodes and then sending it through the system, you can bypass and go to many different ways. So you could sort to different ways of cutting for different put away. Some customers are shipping full boxes, so they don't need to cut it in general. So, hey, just bypass this through and send it to lane 16, and that always goes straight out the door. There's cross-docking operations. So as companies have built all of these warehouses, they're starting to look at how can we use that the most efficient way. And a lot of that starts at the dock door. As long as they're doing that inventory check right away, there's lots of different processes that they can use.
Okay, cool. And before we move on to the next set of questions I've got built up for you, could you characterize like the difference? I've seen a couple of different ones, but I think it's a very interesting topic. Like, what would a semi-automatic induction or like a decant process look like versus an automatic induction, like fully automatic? Like how, you can automate anything, right? Should you? I don't know. And that's why there's semi-automatic systems out there. But talk about the difference between like what you may see in both of those environments.
And a lot of the ability to automate downstream depends on what the quality of that box is coming in. So if you have the same box over and over, automating that, of course, is a lot easier because there's a lot less variables. The unfortunate part is vendors change their boxing as things are taped more. You introduce staples, all of these variables, all of a sudden the ability to automate that changes drastically. So putting in place, checks for your vendors is of course important, but you can't always control what they're doing. So when they do change, you have to have that process built into your automation to handle that. So whether that's dimensioning and saying this box is outside of our range, we don't want to try cutting it, we're just going to pass it through, or introducing metal detection for staples. You mentioned already the barcode instance, so building in different ways to cut based on what that product is. So there's lots of variables, but the more variables are, the more cost you're associating. So that's where companies are constantly juggling. How much money do we want to spend, and where does our ROI look like versus just doing that manual process? And I think a lot of companies have just kept that as manual because there is a lot of nuances, but now they're starting to say, okay, it's time to automate this space and let's investigate that.
Yeah. Well, and so here's like some of these cases where like we'll automate everything we can automate easily, right? So let's open any of the boxes that we can open, and it's a guaranteed like win. But anything else, like we'll just kind of bifurcate the process. I'm going to pass these over to an operator for like, hey, there's a lot of staples in here. We probably don't want to, run a robot across a bunch of metal, or this box does not look right. Something's off in the dimensioning, or maybe it's cracked open already. We want to have somebody look at it. So I think that's a like super interesting case. A lot of times there is this like secondary like manual or a semi-automatic like sort of ecosystem around it, just to make sure that you can cover every case. Okay. So it sort of leads me into the kind of next section of questions I have for you, and like operational considerations when you're looking at like automating your decant and your case opening. Like run me through some of the things that I should be thinking about if I'm designing a system that has like an automated, decant process.
Yeah, a lot has to do with space and the footprint that you have. We see on a lot of manual operations that there's a lot of touches between that dock door and the system because those systems are large. They can only fit in so many spaces inside a building, right? So you have to get it from A to B. And how do you do that efficiently? And the inefficient way, of course, to do that is have a lot of people touch it in a lot of stages. So we say, well, how can we automate that entire space and looking at it as holistic, whether that's including box cutting or not? There's also the call outs of, like you said, sortation, exceptions. Where does that product need to go? A lot of systems have an AMR sitting right next to an ASRS system, and product needs to go to different ones depending on what that product is. So that's all a part of the conversation that we have with our customers is what's the best way to do that? And we see a lot of it is that going through a single system to cut open all of the product and then doing something with it after that. So whether that's a fully automated decanting system or sending those trays to be put away in an AMR. There's lots of different ways to do that.
Yeah, so yeah, just kind of nailing down like that process, like future state, like what do we want this to look like, and understanding that. Like, I think that's obviously critical. I mean, that's probably true for every part of the system as we go through designing it. Like, you really need to nail that down. What about like infrastructure requirements? Are they like? Is there anything onerous in there that you got to watch out for, or is it pretty vanilla?
Yeah, the nice thing of the CASI system is that you drop it in, and a lot of times we tell our customers that it's running that same day. You plug it in and you attach some air, and it's off and running. Again, the nice thing of that is it's all about the footprint, the space, but a high tolerance machine like that, thankfully, doesn't take up too much space, and it does start running pretty quickly from a
kind of commissioning time frame.
Yeah.
So just got a little bit of air, a little bit of power, and you're off to the races. Okay, that's
correct.
What about like box compatibility? Like, obviously not all boxes are created equal. Is there any like rules of thumb there, or like what do you need to know about your inbound kind of corrugate?
Yeah, I'd say that the more uniform you're getting your product from your vendors, the better. Of course, that just allows that automation to be more predictable and then in turn more successful. The tricky part we see a lot is specifically in the return space or the reverse logistics. People send returns back in every box that they can find in their house. Everything from a bag to a cereal box to a shoe box to a small product in a really large box. So that's where you get a lot of the unknowns, right? You can control your vendors a lot of the times in the boxes they send you, and their goal is to keep that product pretty tightly packed. On the return space, they get the label. They look whatever box is closest to send back, and the size really doesn't matter, and that causes a lot of disruption in a facility.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Is there any kind of box that's just like a not openable box, or
the worst is we do hear a lot that customers are getting returns back in black trash bags. That's pretty tough. There's just not a good way to handle that, of course. We get customers who get stuff back in cereal boxes. Those are tough ones just because they're so, the corrugate is so small. But as we work on precision cutting and some of those things, we're able to get that product out. The other tricky one is just the quality of the box. Most of the time your vendors are cubing out a truck or a trailer. That's really easy because the boxes are pretty contained. When it's a return and it went through 5 facilities to get to your building, all of a sudden you see some pretty significant dings, boxes being already open. There's so many variables that are just introduced.
Okay, interesting. So more consistent boxes and more predictable boxes, the better.
Correct. Yeah. The more predictable your vendors can be to you, the more automation you can do. And I would say the more inexpensive you can do it as well.
Okay, that checks out. What about like data? Like, what kind of data do I need to have, or do I always need to have data? Can I just cold call the machines? Like, is that reasonable to do, or should I try to avoid that?
Yeah, and that's where we've talked a little bit about fully automated versus some semi-automated and in different ways to do it. The more data, the better, right? If your WMS in theory knows how every single box wants to be cut or handled, you could do that. There's a lot of programming. There's a lot of time involved with that. Most of our customers don't do that. We have a handful that do. Most of ours plug in our machines and then they just run through product and they set a parameter, cut X millimeters down from the top and run all of the product through. So that's most popular. And we see that even outside of our systems of When we walk into buildings who are doing this in a manual process, they're just cutting open boxes as quickly as they can. They're not looking at what's inside, just because the more time you evaluate a box, the longer it takes to handle it, and then there's more cost, right? Everybody wants to get those product as quickly as you can from that truck into the system.
Okay, that checks out. And then if I'm only opening like one box a day, it probably doesn't make any sense to automate it. Like what are the other kind of scenarios where like it probably doesn't make sense?
Yeah, I would say the high variability is a tough one. Again, there's systems that you can automate through that. But I would say you're having the integrity of boxes. If you're constantly having boxes, a return environment that is always just the mix of everything. Your boxes look terrible. There's bags coming in. It's going to be really hard to automate that regardless. And you do need the volume. So we need to see some serious, thousands of boxes a day. Or on the alternative it's the safety aspect. We'll talk about that a little bit when you say, when does it make sense? But that's another one as well. If the boxes are hard to open, then maybe it makes sense to automate it just because it's a safer operation for your team as well as better ergonomics.
Okay. Well, yeah. So let's hop on over there. What are the best use cases for like automated decanting processes? So maybe like I don't know if you want to talk about like at a high level, like some ROI considerations there. Part of this is a commercial, right? Like, sure, you can open the box. Should you automate that? I think is an excellent question.
Yeah, I think when we talk about it with customers, we're talking about safety, ergonomics, and speed. So are you having cut injuries? If you are, it's probably time to automate that, because those are costly injuries, both from a cost to the organization, but then also just the mentality around an operation, right? If team members are constantly getting injured, that's low for morale. So we talk about that. Then we talk about speed. Are you opening thousands of boxes manually? One, that's a really hard job, and that's a tough place to be in your facility. If you're just throwing bodies at opening boxes, one, it's costly, and two, it is just a tough job. It's typically one of the higher turnover areas. So we say those are two of the biggest that we talk about.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. Okay. Well, so like how many people do you think like typically like the number of people opening boxes? When should I start thinking like, well, it's one person opening boxes? Like, I don't know, it's two people, maybe three people. Like, oh, definitely automate that.
Yeah, I would say 2 to 3 people if that's their sole job, as well as if you have multiple shifts doing it. Another thing that we've talked about with our customers is, do you constantly have a log of product that you're waiting to get into your system? Again, they've spent a significant investment on these ASRS systems, these AMRs. If you're operating at less than ideal, fill rate of your bins, that's a problem. And if you have that product ready to go into those bins, that's a big problem. So how can we help with that? So that's where we say if that's constantly a pain point, is we just can't fill our bins fast enough because of this backlog of product being ready to be opened, then it's time to automate that. And we have customers that say, hey, we have trailers, we have trucks, we have containers that sit in our parking lots for a couple days because they can't get them open fast enough. That's where we say, not only should you talk about automating your box opening and decanting, but then is there bigger systems around that? Can we get product out of that truck faster? Can we help you sort it? So that's where, again, you start to talk, how big of a space do you have? What's your pain points look like? And we kind of go from there.
Let me see what else I got here. So like, how do you ensure like consistent decanting? And I have a wrinkle here for you too, Mitch. Like, what if I want to take it out of the box? Like what should I plan for there in terms of process design?
Yeah, so the getting the product out is the magic answer, right? How do you do that efficiently? And a lot of that depends on what the downstream system looks like. If you're just putting an open box on a tray, that's really easy. It's even easier if it's the same box over and over. It's tricky. Yes, exactly. It's harder when it's random cases and then you need to do something different with maybe batches or something like that. So that's, again, where automation is helpful, because it takes away the guesswork and the time it takes to get that product open. But the more predictable your vendors are with the product they're sending you, automating that is much easier. And that's where our systems are built around random cases, both cutting and opening, but then also decanting and getting the product out of those boxes.
Okay. And what kind of industries do you typically see like that just love automating this sort of inbound? I seem like not everybody's doing this, right? Maybe like water heater distributors are probably not
Yeah.
happening, right?
Yeah. TVs, big product typically aren't in other boxes and getting, you don't need to get that out. We see a lot in the 3PL space. 3PLs historically have just opened a significant amount of boxes, and then their contracts change so frequently that we say that you're looking for a system that's redeployable that you could use depending on customer. So that's big for our 3PL, the industry. Specifically, we see a lot in apparel, your household consumer goods, food and beverage, all of those areas that, again, they're using these ASRS systems and they've done an investment there. Now they want to get product into that system as quickly as possible. So if it can fit in a bin, it typically can run through an automated box opener.
Okay. What would you say like the largest like kind of case size that's reasonable?
We've mentioned shoes. Shoes is the big one because most shoes come in the same standard box from all over the world through the system, and then they're tricky boxes, of course, because they have kind of the lid and it's loose, and you need human operation. But that's the big one for us that we see. I think most of those boxes are roughly 25 to 30 inches tall, and they're usually big boxes. In the food space, we see a lot of raw ingredients are typically 40 to 50 pounds. So that's where you get more into the ergonomics. You might not be operating or you might not be sending as much product through your system. But if somebody's job is to cut a 40 to 50 pound box of a solid good and then flip it over and dump it out, that's a really hard job and not a job that I envy to do that all day, every day. So that's where we say it's a mix between speed and ergonomics. But that's certainly one that we see with our customers that is makes a lot of sense.
So you can cut it and you could dump it like all in the same kind of like section of conveyor, I guess.
Correct. Yep, in a relatively small footprint as well.
Yeah, cutting a box is one thing. Lifting 40 pounds, 400 times an hour is murder.
Yeah, that's why that's a high turnover area typically.
Yeah. Okay, that checks out. Well, since you're talking about that, like there are injuries associated with boxes, and I've cut myself up with cardboard. But I think like the bigger one is like when you have to use a knife. Like you can poke yourself pretty good, right? Taking knife safety courses, or like the most infamous example is that little like T-shaped like safety knife, and then like it doesn't work right, so somebody uses a pin, stab themselves. Like it's a comedy of errors trying to open boxes sometimes.
We see customers using the widest variety of ways to get product open. My favorite, like you said, is the safety knife that gets gummed up with tape. That's common. We have a lot of customers that use that instead of tape boxes, they're glued, and they use like door stops to prop them open. And I'm watching them. I'm like, that's a tough job. That's where we say we can automate that. A relatively inexpensive investment, and it runs quickly. Is huge for our customers.
So you don't have to use your car keys to open a box.
Correct. And the worst is we see, so all customers are different. There's some, it's a fireable offense to have any sort of knife because there's a high injury cost associated with that. And then there's some that there's just no restrictions around that. They have the first aid kit right next to the station. And we say, well, there might be a better way to do this as well.
What do you like typically like find as like a cost of safety, like in a box opening environment? What's that look like to you guys?
Yeah, the data that we've seen is it costs an organization anywhere from $30,000 to $40,000 per major injury. And so that's where we say if you've had a couple major injuries this year, which most companies who are opening a lot of boxes have, then there's a better way to do it, and maybe it's time to start thinking to automate it.
We got it. No, that checks out. All right, and then like obviously ergonomic benefits, like we deal a lot with like moving cases of stuff around and or pallets, and like yeah, you can hurt your back, you hurt your knees, and doing it for 8 hours is like it's just I don't know how many years you can do it for.
Right,
it's hard work.
Yeah, the 40 to 50 pound boxes of solid goods is not. You always see it on your job description as a standard operation, but I think once somebody actually starts to do it, it's like, oh, this is a lot.
Yeah. I'm a pretty big guy, and like, I still don't like enjoy doing it like for a long time. And 1 pound box over your head constantly, like yeah, it adds up pretty quick. Okay, so like looking into the future, like where do you see this like decanting process going? Like what kind of like innovations do you think we're going to see in the next few years?
Yeah, we've started to see a lot of customers move to smaller boxes. So I think a couple years ago it was, what is the biggest box that we can put in cube out a truck or a container, using big boxes. The problem with that is they're heavy then, right? So we're seeing customers go to smaller boxes. So it's easier for an associate to handle. The problem is 30, 40, 50% more boxes now need to be open. So that's the trade-off. Is it's easier for somebody to handle it, but now they're opening 2 times as many boxes as they usually did. So we're seeing that, and as dim weight and some of these things is becoming more and more of a focus. You're saying, how can we tightly pack those boxes more and more? So you rarely do we see customers that have a lot of space at the top. So that makes the manual process even harder, because before, if you had a lot of space up there, you could cut open a box pretty easily. You weren't worried about hitting product. We go back to the coat option. If you're manually cutting open $600-700 coats, you got to be pretty careful cutting them open.
Yeah. What's the kind of methodology behind like not hitting something under it? So I have some cardboard and it's opaque and there's something expensive inside. I need to cut the top off, but I don't want to, tear through an Arc'teryx jacket or something like that, right?
Yeah, the tricky part is a lot of customers are cutting that tape, and then it goes to the next operation. But the problem is you've really just pushed that operation to somebody else now, because opening tape still requires opening the flaps and reaching in there and grabbing that product. So that's where we say the best way to do it is truly automate cutting that lid fully open. So somebody's job is either to reach in there easily or just open the box, very simple, without much ergonomic strain, and reach in there. Doing a simple tape cut and passing that along really isn't the best option.
So if you're fully cut the top off, like how do you make sure you don't go too deep? Like what's the without giving me too much secret sauce?
That's the secret sauce.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways to do it. We have 6 or 7 tools depending on the product, so we haven't seen too many cases that we can't cut. Everything from, we've used the jacket and the shoe example, food and beverage, we're cutting open cases of beer or something like that are of course very tight, and you can't be in the business of nicking cans of beer in an automated operation because they tend to make a mess. So how do you do that? That's kind of the secret sauce, and then that's what we're saying. Hey, there's ways to automate that. Customers don't think there is, but there is, and that's why we're here today.
Oh, okay, so maybe the question, like, or maybe the answer is like you got to do your homework.
Yep.
Right. And I think like you kind of mentioned this to me in the past. I've called you on a couple of projects before, but you can open more boxes than you actually think you can automatically.
Yeah.
Like I kind of always just kind of in my head, just kind of like, oh, there's no way we can do that. But
Yep.
I'm usually wrong about that.
Yeah, I like to call our engineers and say, hey, I got a new one for you. Figure out how to cut it open. And they like the challenge. So I haven't seen my time at CASI too many boxes that we haven't been able to open. And that's kind of the fun part. And our team likes the challenge. As much fun as it is to cut open something with 2 inches of headspace, sometimes our guys like to say, okay, let's get creative. How can we get this open? And I think that keeps the organization interesting as well.
Well, Mitch, thank you very much for hopping on the podcast with me. This is a really interesting conversation. I'll be calling you about some projects after this, probably anyway. Like, I don't know, any last farewell words for the audience out there?
No, it's been great. This is an area that organizations are really starting to focus on. So we appreciate you shedding some light on it. And it was a pleasure to be on the automation podcast this morning.
Awesome, man. Thank you very much. Well, for anyone following on at home, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Like and subscribe. Check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you follow podcasts, and or you'll see me popping up on LinkedIn. So thank you very much, and see you next time.